Hello, thank you for having me as part of one of these wonderful Aspika Talks. My name is Lee Stockner, and I'm the creator of a program named Occupational Octaves Piano. I'm also the president of adaptive learning for the World Piano Teachers Association. I have a very interesting story to tell about my life and how I got to this role because it is nothing that I ever expected, nor was it anything I ever set out specifically to do. This was more of a journey that I think the universe had ready for me, and I was able to take on the path of this journey. And by taking on this path of the journey, I have gotten to touch countless lives of people, especially individuals on the autism spectrum, who may not have been able to fully encounter music at the level that I was able to encounter it, which is as a classical piano player. And I've been able to empower students who maybe can't read or write or speak very well. They may have short attention spans and they may struggle socially. But with the program that I've created, when they're sitting down at the piano, there is no confusion, there is clarity, there is practice, and there is music. There's Mozart, there's Bach, there's Beethoven, there's Billy Joel, there's Bill Withers, there's even my own original material. It's a program that I absolutely love running and I have built up from absolute scratch. And I'm going to enjoy telling you all about it. But first, I'll tell you a bit about my background, how and where I grew up, and where these passions really came from. I was born and raised on Long Island in New York and lived in many different parts of New York, but have found my adult life also on Long Island, which is a very, very beautiful place to be. When I was about 4 years old, I took my first piano lesson because my parents would tell me that I would keep on reaching up to the piano that my mom had in the house, and I would be playing it before I could even see the keys. I had a teacher at 4 years old who was a cool guy, and he taught me a few things, but it wasn't really until I was about 8 years old and I moved to the town that I grew up in, and I met my real teacher. Her name was Diane. And Diane was first and foremost a woman of God, but also a woman that was an absolutely incredible, incredible classical player and a classical teacher. I credit Diane with a great deal of my evolution as a musician, as a music teacher, and as a person. She was one of the strongest leaders in my life, and I always pay tribute to her because I appreciate her so much. When I was 15, Diane first started to teach me how to teach playing the piano. Before that, for about 7 years, I was her student and I was excelling at the piano. I was enrolled in a program named NYSSMA, the New York State School Music Association, where you would get judged year by year on your playing skills and get to very, very, very challenging music by the time you were into levels 5 and 6. And I was a level 5 and 6 NYSSMA player, which made my talent and my skill undeniable as I would get near perfect scores each time I would go to one of these classical competitions. But in the background, I had some other things happening that weren't as focused and as strong and as passionate and as talent driven. I had gone through a series of major injuries, and I was also diagnosed with attention deficit disorder. So many different things were a challenge for me. It was a challenge socially because I spent many years outside of school in hospitals recovering from these tremendous injuries. I wasn't able to play with other kids the same way because there was always worries about the injuries themselves. And I developed, along with the attention deficit, a pretty strong case of apathy when it came to my schoolwork. I was not a great student, and I frankly didn't care all that much. But there was still the piano. It was still this absolutely undeniable force in my life. And there was still music, which was the thing that got me through these injuries and got me through months at a time sitting in a hospital bed, being disconnected from everybody. Music kept me connected, and music was my passion. And I like to tell people that at 9 years old, when I broke my leg, I broke my femur bone for the first time. That was the first time that music saved me. It was there for me completely and totally, whether it was the classical music that my teacher Diane would give to me, or it was silly rock music like Green Day. It was all that I had, and it was all that I could fully appreciate. And it was was the one thing that would never turn its back in any way. Music was my passion. So by the time I reached the end of high school, and I'm already a music teacher, I write my high school music, pardon me. By the time I reach the end of high school, I'm already a music teacher because Diane taught me to teach when I was 15, and I wrote my high school music, geez. By the time I was 15, I was getting toward the end of high school, and I was already a music teacher thanks to Diane. And I remember writing in my high school yearbook, music is the soundtrack of our lives. Never stop listening, never let it die. And I have done a pretty good job of sticking to that quote because I've done everything I can as a music teacher, going back to 15 years old, to keep music alive in as many people as I can. So, I get toward the end of high school. I'm already a music teacher. I've recovered from my leg injuries, and I'm going off and trying to live like a normal 17-year-old kid. I'm getting ready to go to college at the local community college. I have a whole bunch of students of my own who I have a great, great passion for teaching, and I'm kind of moving along life. A few years later, I went away to college to a school in upstate New York where I continued to flounder educationally. I continued to be apathetic. I continued to struggle with my attention. And at the end of the day, I just didn't care that much. I wanted to come back home and I wanted to be teaching piano lessons because it was what I was good at. I could make a couple of bucks doing it. And again, I loved it. I loved the work. So I would be doing some retail jobs and also teaching some piano lessons. I would go back and forth with trying to get my education, but by that time in my early 20s, I had really given up on myself in that way. I had no faith in myself to succeed in school. I had no interest in walking the paths that other people walked because I knew that mine was very different and very individualized. So I kept on working menial jobs and I kept on teaching individual piano lessons. Finally, one day, after all the failures in school, after the social failures, after the emotional failures, after most things were failing besides my piano playing and my piano teaching, I was hanging out at the music store that I grew up taking lessons in and buying guitars from, where I was in between lessons that I was teaching. And a woman came down to the store with her son, who was about 10 years old at that time. And this young man was diagnosed with autism. And other than a few neighbors that I knew from school, I had never really encountered or experienced any time with anybody on the autism spectrum. And this young man displayed some things that in common day to day life might have looked a little bit strange. The way he walked was a little bit different. The way he phrased his sentences, his lack of eye contact, all of these things were a bit different than what you'd be used to. So the mom of this young man asks the manager of the music store, "Do you have anybody here that works with people that have autism?" And he said, "No, but I get the feeling if anybody could have success, it would be that guy over there." And the guy that he was pointing at was me. He just had an intuition. So I met the family, and this young man's mother, her name is Deb, who is still a huge part of my life to this day, over 20 years later. Deb told me that Chase is different in a handful of ways. Number one, she said to me, "How did you feel on September 11th, 2001?" And I said, "I was devastated, like all New Yorkers and all Americans." And she told me that Chase, her son, he didn't care. It had absolutely no effect on him at all. She also said that if he saw a baby crying, he would go into a full-blown panic attack and meltdown and really lose a sense of how to control himself because just the sound of a baby crying was so upsetting to him. So that day, I knew I was in a completely different world of things and I was going to have to adapt, which I felt prepared to do in order to have success with this young man who I took on as a student. So in our very first lesson, I had to make my very first adaptation. As I was trying to teach him about certain keys on the piano, I noticed he kept on looking at my pockets. And it dawned on me, that's because keys are in your pockets, like your house keys or your car keys. So I realized that I had to be specific about everything, and everything could be misconstrued in very, very interesting ways, but also that this young man was very, very capable of learning as long as I was capable of meeting him in the middle of his learning process. So that same day, his mom, Deb, said, Lee, you are a natural for this field and you need to work in this field. You need to be around more and more individuals like this. So I went home and I started applying at local pardon me. So I went home and I started applying at local schools for students on the autism spectrum. And the very first one that I applied to that called me in for an interview saw this big guy. I was even bigger back then. I probably weighed about 50 pounds more. And they were very excited that I was interested in working with this population of people. When I told them the story of how I got involved and got interested, they said, Did you know that Chase actually goes to this school? So the next thing I know, I'm working at a school for students on the autism spectrum in what's called an ABA program, Applied Behavior Analysis, which really helped us understand how to help these students structure their lives to get things that they may have a very difficult time communicating their want or need for. I met students that were completely different from each other while all having the same autism diagnosis. Some were violent, some were as kind as can be, some wouldn't talk, some wouldn't stop talking. Every day was very, very, very interesting. And as you can imagine, because I'm a large guy, they put me with the strongest and most violent students that were in the building. So I got a real course on this world of autism and what other people may go through while experiencing it, and just how much help somebody may need to get through activities of daily life, like basic conversations or basic trips to the bathroom. I started to learn some amazing things and break things down in a way that was very fascinating to me, especially as a teacher. One thing that I'll never forget was when we were trying to help a student learn to brush his teeth. There were 12 steps to take that all had to be done correctly in order for you to brush your teeth properly. And that includes walking into the bathroom and not into a bedroom. That includes holding the toothbrush the correct direction. That includes remembering to take the cap off the toothbrush. And I was absolutely blown away by all the micro instructions inside of the macro instructions that we're able to use to empower somebody to do something that is a challenge for them. So I really fell in love with the field. I fell in love with working with all these different individuals, with all these different challenges, forming relationships with coworkers and forming relationships with the families, and doing something that felt wonderful. And I would walk out the door of the school and go out there and continue my previous life as a piano teacher. So the mornings were all about the school for students with autism, and the evenings were all about the piano lessons. It was an inevitability that those two came together. And they came together on a day where I saw an opportunity. I saw a whole bunch of different color coordinated programs that students were working with. For example, when doing a cooking program, instead of telling somebody that they need to pour 1 fluid ounce into a cup, it may say fill the red cup and pour into the bowl. This way, a student who can't exactly understand fluid ounces may still be able to partake in the process of cooking just by filling up the correct color cup. And I was very inspired by these ideas. And one day the light bulb went off over my head, and I realized, okay, a student that could type on a keyboard can move their fingers in this way, and we have all these different ways to make matching systems. Maybe we can get somebody to play the piano through one of these matching systems instead of these colorless traditional music notes that I've been teaching since I was 15 years old. So at 25, an idea dawns on me. Excuse me. So at 25, an idea dawns on me to put rings onto students' fingers, just like that, in a few different colors, and label a piano a very specific way. And through those two adaptations, we could actually teach people to play the piano. And the day that I thought of that was the first iteration of what it would eventually turn into Occupational Octaves Piano. So, while working in this school for students with autism, I had many connections with many families, and many of them gave me a shot to be an adaptive special needs piano teacher using these colored letters and using the rings. And just so we know, this is what the system itself actually looks like. I created this alternative music notation so that I could teach the students on the autism spectrum that I was working with to play. From day one of trying out my first lesson with my first student, this has been successful, wildly successful, beyond my own imagination successful. And I became very, very, very oriented with what this program would actually become. What I realized was I could create a parallel world so that people that can't read traditional music notes as I can will be able to fully engage in the works of Mozart and Bach and Beethoven and Chopin, just like I did, but in an alternative way. I started to think about it as like yoga without the chakras per se, without having to do all the chants, without having to do all of the ancient words that go along with it. Just using yoga for the stretching, or just using the piano for the playing. An occupational octave started to develop little by little with my first local program where I would go out to service provider fairs and I would meet families who were interested in lessons. We'd book the lessons and I created a little parallel world to the world I was already living in. Instead of traditional music notes with traditional students, we have adaptive music notes with adaptive students. As I began to grow the program, more and more people became more and more interested, and the success was immediate. So, after a few years of running the program, I was approached by a few people that saw the work I was doing because I was posting it online. And they said, Lee, you need to get this program to us. You need to be training us. We have all of these students that are on the autism spectrum. They're not able to read the traditional music notes and play, but they love music. Please help us. So, little by little, I started to create what would eventually turn into the 8-book curriculum that is Occupational Octaves Piano. The curriculum is just like the traditional curriculums that I taught since I was 15 years old, and I started to learn myself at 5 years old, except it's written in an adaptive language that is incredibly user-friendly as emojis. Little by little, the business started to grow. I published the program so that teachers around the world could start to use it themselves, and that's exactly what began to happen. We started to sell this occupational octaves material in countries as far as Australia and as local as New Jersey. It's been going incredibly well for a long time now, and it is part of the greatest pride of my life. I made this program from absolutely zero, and now it is used all around the world by all different people with all different needs. But a question kept on coming up over and over. What about using traditional music notes? That's what I really want to learn to do. So, after years and years of having occupational octaves piano out there, and teachers just like me all around the world creating their own recitals and programs that use this so that people needing an adaptive approach are able to be included in the traditional works. So, after about 10 years of occupational octaves, I began to create the Stockner method. And the Stockner method is designed for two purposes. One is to go straight from occupational octaves piano into the world of traditional music notation, and the other is to just use the Stockner method as a standalone traditional music note program for anyone who wants to learn to read traditional music notes. And this is where and this is one of those times that things really came full circle for me. Here I am with where it all started, traditional music notes, but we're using some of the work from occupational octaves to help people learn. And that's what the Stockner method does. It blends the ease of occupational octaves with traditional music notes. But along the way, I was approached by a company named Unitas TI. And Unitas had the wonderful idea of helping me digitize all of the many goals that people could reach inside of classrooms and therapy settings that have nothing to do with music itself. What that means is that if there's a student that is struggling to concentrate, you can use occupational octaves to help them expand on their concentration ability by giving them something they're interested in. You could use it with an occupational therapist who needs to help somebody work on their hand stabilization and their finger isolation. There is a load of other ways that you could use this program to reach the goals that are inside of classrooms through using Unitas TI and having this up on a digitized platform for schools and therapeutic settings. So we really started to, at this point, hit on all of these different ways the program could be used. It could be used by regular music teachers who have neurodivergent students. It could be used inside of classrooms so that the piano could be a medium to reach goals that are unrelated to music. And it could also be used as a jumping off point to learn to read traditional music notes. And with these three main pieces, we've been able to bring loads of instructors and students into the world of music to use it just for their needs. And that is an absolute blessing because it means more music for more people. And not just listening to music, recreating music from your own fingers. The original goal and the original passion that I had that brought me to musicianship in a way that I've chosen to be a lifetime way. Whether I'm playing, whether I'm listening, whether I'm teaching, music to me is the core of life, and occupational octaves piano is a wonderful, wonderful pathway to it. And that brings me to the paper that I wrote pardon. And that brings me to a very special paper that I wrote for Traditional Medicine Research. Traditional Medicine Research, a research journal, was putting out a special issue on brain science. And I was contacted to be a part of this. And the reason why is because through occupational octaves, we broke down a bit of the code to increase in quality of life through music. And that code comes down to something called transient hypofrontality, which is a really fancy way of saying a closed mental loop. So it turns out that a person like me who learned how to read traditional music notes at a very young age and practice and practice and practice and played and played and played, I have my passion in music because I was constantly experiencing something named a flow state. And in a flow state, all of your hard work and your expertise and your concentration and your passion come together in a moment where you play something on the piano that's very, very challenging, but you do so in a way that is absolutely effortless. Something amazing comes out of your fingers and you're barely even trying. I have been experiencing that since a very, very young age. But along the way of using occupational octaves with so many different students of different backgrounds and different needs, there was one commonality I started to see. And that was this thing that looked to me like that state of flow that I was experiencing at the piano. I would see it when students that were nonverbal and had tremendous challenges in behavior from everything from, oh man, one particular student who would stomp his feet so much that eventually he had hairline fractures in his leg and would slam doors so hard on his way in and out of rooms that the doors would break regularly, and is so obsessive compulsive that when he wants to cross something off a list, I've seen him cross it. I've seen him use the pen back and forth so much that he actually cut straight through to the bottom of a pad. This particular individual shows incredible intensity. And I never see him smile because he's always in such an intense, obsessive, compulsive mode. And one day he was in the middle of this very challenging lesson. And it was a lesson where it was very rare because I was actually thinking about ending it early. He was in such an intense and boiling over looking mode. And all of a sudden, he just completely calmed and started to smile. And this young man never actually smiles, as I keep on repeating, because that's very, very important to drive home in this story. A young man that never smiles, that was in the middle of an intense, stressful moment that I have sitting at the piano, that is doing he's having such an intense moment that I may end the program in that moment. All of a sudden, it just stopped. And he started to smile and he started to breathe, and his hands continued to move, and it looked like he was putting in absolutely no effort at all. And I realized at that moment that the young man was experiencing a flow state. And the reason why he was able to do it came down to three factors of a flow state. One is concentration, and he was fully concentrated. Two is expertise. And because occupational octaves is so user friendly, this young man that can't read or write was able to learn and use this program proficiently. But most importantly, he had emotion. All of a sudden, the emotion poured into it. And while this young man's nickname is Poker Face because he showed such little emotion, I saw it absolutely pour out of him. And if you're a musician, you know that feeling of serotonin and dopamine flying through your body from the activity of playing music. So when I saw this young man experience that, in spite of his severe symptoms that stem from autism and obsessive compulsive disorder and attention deficit, I realized that something different was happening. And that's when I got heavily involved in the flow state research. That's what brought me to eventually do that, and to eventually see that students that were engaged in this program, because they were able to concentrate on it at an expert level, they were experiencing that same flow state that I was experiencing. And that flow state was the reason that I have the passion for the music in the first place. Experiencing that flow state is why music was there for me for weeks and months at a time when I would sit in the hospital bed. It's why when I started this business and had no clear path forward other than the business cards that I had made up for myself, I had the faith because music was going to be there to drive me forward. And I knew that I would get to live my life being around music all the time. So all of those driving factors, all of those flow state factors, all of a sudden became part of a reality for the students that I was working with. So while I was putting all these colors and letters on the paper for one reason, and I was creating all these clinical goals to put on Unitas TI and to put into classrooms, what was really going on underneath was the search for an increased quality of life through music. And I say that very seriously because the entire point of a flow state is to increase one's quality of life. And that's what music is there for. And that's what occupational octaves is there for. And when I spent countless hours by myself with colored markers on blank pages and bringing them to students and experimenting and developing and tinkering and changing little by little, I put together something so that whether you're a neurodivergent student, whether you're a traditional piano teacher, whether you're a DIY learner, you are set up through this system of colored letters and rhythmically designed boxes to actually improve your life and have a greater quality of life through the wonders of not only listening to music, but recreating music out of your own fingertips. Using this as an opportunity for passion, is an opportunity for love. It's an opportunity for engagement. And what I'd like to close this with is it's an opportunity for improved mental health. And the reason why is because on your hardest day, you could throw yourself into a new challenge. That new challenge will be clear as day. You could work on it that day. You can continue working on it as you advance. And if you've never played the piano before, and all of a sudden, a song like Fear Elise is coming out of your own fingertips, you're going to discover something new within yourself that you didn't know was there. And it is absolutely amazing. We market this program to special needs, to traditional lessons, to DIY learners, and to the aging population. There is now really no excuse for you to learn to play the piano in a fruitful, enjoyable way that will increase the quality of your life. My name is Lee Stockner. I'm very, very proud to share this program with you and a little bit about my life, and I hope that your life and the quality of it will improve through music.